Good afternoon, it's 16 past 12 right here at Bay FM to Madonna Guy from New Leaf Natural Therapies, and we had a pretty good response last week from the public.
We did.
Phoning up, asking all about these tests. Tell me more.
So last week Roger and I were chatting about two different tests. One's the bioimpedance screening that we do, and the other one was the insulin resistance testing. So of course people get their cholesterol checked all the time at the doctors, and that's fabulous. And in fact I had a lady, and so when we put together the two pieces of information from these two tests, we can find out all sorts of things about where we are in relation to diabetes, where we are in relation to heart disease and inflammation, how well our body is detoxifying, all sorts of things. So it ends up giving us wads of information that it's just a little bit different to the way that medically people look at it. I had a lady in this morning actually who brought in her medical tests, and for the first time, or I don't recall seeing this before, but when the cholesterol scores were there, it said, total cholesterol, then HDL, and in brackets it said protective, and then LDLs, and in brackets it said atherogenic, which means building up gunk on the arteries. Atherosclerosis.
Bad stuff.
Yeah, so it's that build-up of plaque in the arteries, which is why, of course, doctors get scared when our cholesterol get too high. But what the interesting thing, we were chatting about it, is that it's all about the combination, and doctors will always say this to people, you've got plenty of the good cholesterol, but your total cholesterol's too high, so I think we should do something about it.
It's all about balance.
It's all about balance, absolutely. Now, the main things, firstly, cholesterol. We've said it before, but I'll say it again. It's a nutrient that the liver releases when the body needs it.
And the body must have it.
The body must have it, even when you reduce your cholesterol via diet. It's usually only by a maximum of 10 to 20%.
Or via statins.
Well, yes, but then it sort of can change the ratio of the good cholesterol to the bad cholesterol, because one of the things that cholesterol does is stores toxins, or it goes around binding with toxins. So
it's the vacuum cleaner.
It really is.
Yep.
It really is. So it races around sopping up things like heavy metals and stress hormones and excess glucose. So when you've got too much sugar in your blood, it can go around sopping up things like the pollution, if we're in the car all day driving around with our job. It's the sort of thing that it's really important, but also we need cholesterol to make hormones. So it doesn't matter whether men are low in testosterone or women are low in, their estrogen, progesterone, whatever, or whether we can't make enough adrenaline to get us through a busy day. These are all hormones. We need cholesterol to make any hormone in the body. So if we've got really, really low levels of cholesterol, then we're not going to be able to make our hormones we need. And one of the things that, particularly the brain, your brain has a huge amount of cholesterol in it.
I think it's full.
So it's actually really important to have good levels of good healthy cholesterol in the body.
You didn't look at my brain when I dropped in the other day. This is all the VLA, isn't it? The
that
body
one,
composition and cellular health analysis.
Well, that one lets us know about the inflammation in the body. So once again, I had a guy a couple of days ago who he looks really, really healthy. So once again, you cannot tell by the way a person looks as to what's going on deep inside the body. So sometimes they can be within normal, the body mass index. So basically that should be a maximum of 25, and that's considered normal weight. But once we hit between 25 and 30, that's when the body starts increasing inflammatory hormones that it's releasing. So there's a direct correlation, and this has been done with many trials, where increased weight increases the inflammatory hormones. And I think I've said many times on air, I know that when I put on an excess 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, actually, it's probably around 6 or 7 extra kilos that my joints start aching, I start getting more inflammatory things. I had low-level fibromyalgia many years ago that I sort of sorted out, but I am holding a few...
Quickly, just once again, what is fibromyalgia?
So that is low-level inflammation in the muscles. So it's particularly the muscles. It's a fibrous muscle.
It's painful. You lack strength.
Absolutely. Yep. And it's the sort of thing that can be quite debilitating, because it's also linked with chronic fatigue. And in fact, chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia 80% of the time go together.
Tied together.
Yeah, absolutely. And what it ends up doing is slows down the whole metabolism of the body. So quite often by the time people get... I think there was a study last week that came out somewhere that said, there is such a thing as chronic fatigue. They've done it again. They've proven that people aren't ning-nongs when they're saying, I've been tired for 20 years.
I had a mate who suffered, I think he was in his late 40s, had a good job with the government, And eventually it just wore him down. There were days on end where he couldn't get out of bed. It was a shocking thing. He's a lot better today, but he had to give up his job because he could not perform.
Yeah, and medically, I think the only thing that's been, most people who we see with fibromyalgia really find that the drugs for pain relief really don't do very much. And it's the different types of pain as to whether or not drugs are going to do much good for them. So you can imagine if you've got fibromyalgia, it means every muscle cell in your body is inflamed, which means that just taking a painkiller really isn't going to do enough because your cells are actually screaming out for help.
And you're just masking the pain.
You really are, and sometimes it doesn't mask enough. And these people get to the point where they take 2 in the morning just because they're scared not to, and it's a habit. Whereas painkillers also do other things in the body. So they're anti-inflammatories, of course, but there are many processes in the body that are inflammatory that we need. So it's an inflammatory process to digest our food. So a lot of the time, you know, how people can start getting heartburn and that sort of thing, that's why you have to take painkillers with a meal. Because otherwise you can cause ulcerations and all sorts of things and deterioration of the gut lining. So it's not something to be taken willy-nilly. And I think the only drug that's ever been proven to do anything really for chronic fatigue has been antidepressants, which is interesting because a lot of people come to me and they say, well, the doctor wants me to take these drugs, but I don't want to take that. I'm not depressed. I'm just stressed about my health. Because they wake up every day in pain and can't get through.
There was a theory that have a cold shower or a very cold bath to shock the body, but I don't know if that's proven to be correct.
Well, there were a lot of water therapies around sort of 50 to 150 years ago, and they do all sorts of good things, but when it comes down to it, your cells aren't detoxing properly. So it's like your muscle cells are constipated and dehydrated. So they're not getting nutrients in, they're not getting fluid in, they're not getting waste products out. So what you need to do is really start working at those core levels. And a lot of people with chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, you need to really go gently because these people are often very toxic. It can have been an old, like things like Ross River virus or Epstein-Barr virus.
Raised its head again.
Yeah, and the viruses, once they get into the system, that can cause a lot of pain and discomfort and exhaustion and years on end for a lot of people. Yeah. So therefore, if the underlying cause was a virus, means you need to go into the immune system to really start doing something with it. And the immune system, 90% of it is in the gut. So when we are looking at the VLA, the bioimpedance screening, the cellular fluid balance, that actually gives us the amount of inflammation in the gut wall. So if the gut wall is inflamed, that indicates there might be some immune system stuff going on. So once again, there's things that we can determine going by people's history when we're doing these tests. One of my ladies this morning, I did a combination of I looked at her blood and we did a VLA, the bioimpedance screening. And it's funny because one of the things she said pretty much as soon as she walked through the door, actually I introduced her to Rob coming up the hallway and I said, oh, this is Rob, our acupuncturist. And she said, well, that made me stop eating sugar, so that's a bit of a trigger as to my brain going, wonder why she's here. So then when we're sitting down, I'm looking at her blood and there's all sorts of signs of inflammation and also some infections in there. But then when we did the bioimpedance screening, her inflammation levels were really, really, really low for her. But when we start losing weight, because we're going to, so that's going to be a process. But when you start losing weight and you cut out the sugars, parasites, fungus, candida, they all love a sweet acidic environment. So do you know people who go on a diet and then all of a sudden they're craving sweets more than they've ever craved before? Oh, and not even just sweets, but things like toasts or breads. Anything that turns the bloodstream into an acidic environment feeds things like parasites, fungus, candida.
And we were chatting off air before you came on. I said I've gone strictly protein.
Yes.
And you said, are you still eating bread? And I said, well, yes, I do have 2 slices in the morning, 2 slices of toast. But I just remembered one thing. I do have a Wheat Bix, a Vibrix.
Yes.
That's wheat too, isn't it?
It certainly is.
And I love them.
Yeah.
So I've got to stop that too. Okay.
Yeah, because grains are very acid forming. And especially when we're trying to move tummy fat, you've got to cut out the acid-forming foods. So, and I know it's boring, but it's about eating. It's about eating protein. It's about eating the green leafies. It's about increasing the combination of your vegetables. Yeah, it is. It's eggs and fish and nuts and seeds. Those sort of things, so that you're getting a wide variety.
There's lots of things you can do with an egg.
There really is.
Yeah.
There really is. And the funny thing is, when you're trying to lose weight, for most people, cheese isn't a bad thing. People think, oh, it's going to be so boring. You can have cheesy omelettes for brekkie, just don't have the toast.
I've been told not to eat cheese.
Is that because you're lactose
intolerant? No. Our genes in the Jeffries family is very healthy.
Okay, so why were you told that?
No, I just heard it's a bad, and I told my friend in Belgium, I said, because she loves having cheese,
Yes.
they all do over there.
Yeah.
And they're all so thin, that's the thing that annoys me. They love their breads, they love their wines, and they love cheese.
There's less genetically modified wheats over in Europe. I know last year 6 countries voted to allow genetically modified wheat for the first time ever, like last year. So it's sort of going into that crazy...
Silly. Hey, if you've just tuned in, we're chatting with Madonna Guy, you know that, don't you? New Leaf Natural Therapies, and they're at 94 Edith Street, Wynnum, and if you'd like to give them a call, the number is 33486098. Now, going back to this person that came in, this gentleman that came in, after hearing the show last week.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Yeah, so when we had a look at his VLA, the inflammation levels were really, really high. Now, people think of inflammation as being pain. So as soon as I sort of pointed out that inflammation's high, usually people say, oh, I don't get aches and pains, my muscles feel good, don't have any joint pain, and people try to make it fit into terminology where they would have to have like a Panadol or something or an aspirin. So because that's what, that's the ads we see on TV.
Yeah, it's pushed down your throat.
It is. You see the blue body with the red, wow, wow, wow,
Look, there are times you take them, but
exactly.
Not for general pain.
But when inflammation shows up in the VLA, it's not like that. This is about individual cells that are inflamed. So we're not talking about a joint, we're not talking about an elbow, we're not talking about the left big toe that got kicked at Christmas time. We're talking about overall inflammation levels in the body.
You don't feel that pain.
You often don't, because one of the things that the body does to dilute those toxins or that inflammation is stores fluid. So therefore, on page 2 of the VLA bioimpedance screening, there's a thing called the extracellular fluid in the top right-hand corner. So the more excess fluid we have...
And you could be litres over...
Absolutely.
Like 7 litres.
Absolutely. I had my guy this week, he actually didn't look overweight. But he had many litres of excess fluid, and to look at him you wouldn't know. He can fit his rings on, he can gold bling around his neck, only joking. So he could sort of, you can't see it in a lot of people. Absolutely. But when you think about every cell in the body, it can be around individual cells that your body is retaining fluid. So once again, it's not necessarily the fingers or toes, so you wouldn't notice it with like putting your rings on and off or your shoes on and off, because it's so evenly spread throughout the body.
Amazing. And look, if you want to have a VLA test done, it's very simple. I dropped in just the other day, just prior to having a lunch down at Wynnum, and I had a cholesterol check, and believe it or not, I was plugged up with these electronic little tabs, and within, 5 minutes you had a result, and my cholesterol was, I think, 3.1, which, folks, was only a couple of days earlier. I had a result, the normal blood test from my GP, exactly the same, 3.1, but the results from the GP took a lot longer to come through.
Yes.
Amazing. Hey, did you read in the paper today, diabetes drug trial, a drug that reduces blood sugar and promotes weight loss can cut the chances of at-risk patients developing type 2 diabetes significantly. An international trial found treatment with, I think it's called liraglutide, which interacts with brain regions and controls appetite and energy intake, had a dramatic effect on diabetes risk in obese and pre-diabetes patients. So what do you think of that?
Some of these drugs, especially the drug trials, often aren't that long, like 6 to 12 weeks, that sort of thing. You can imagine when we're seeing side effects of different drugs, it's not for 10, 20, 30 years that we're seeing the long-term effects. Like, for example, I've said before, there is conclusive evidence that shows 20 years on antidepressants, you're increasing your risk of dementia by 5% every year. So when we're on things like beta blockers for heart disease to lower the blood pressure, same thing, an extra 5% risk of dementia per year. So when we start playing around with these drugs, we're not talking, you might feel fine on them for 6, 12 weeks. You might feel fine on them for 3 years. But it's sometimes when people come and see us, and don't forget, naturopaths have a different way of looking at things to a medical GP, because a GP is looking at your symptoms and going...
Thank God there is
absolutely,
that balance, yeah.
Absolutely. So when doctors are looking at your symptoms and you're starting to say, oh, I'm getting nerve pain, or I'm getting tingling, or I'm getting numbness in my foot, they're thinking, what can I do for that? So they'll find the medication, and sort of go, oh, okay, Lyrica's a good drug for that, and sort of trial you on that. Whereas from a naturopathic perspective, we sort of say, oh, okay, so you've had 3 operations in the last 5 years, so therefore there's anaesthetics and possibly antibiotics or something, and oh, okay, and how long have you had blood pressure issues? How long have you been on that? People often say 10, 20, 30 years, and then they say, oh, I had this one to start with and I had these side effects, so I got swapped onto this one. And so when we start looking back and all of a sudden you're adding up the amount of years people have had problems, like you really are sort of, it's one drug and then another and then another.
It's not an instant result to turn it all back.
No, it really isn't. But quite often when you're having a look, you can go, oh, okay, I hate to say it, but I can sort of see why this is going on.
That's wonderful news, because one of our biggest health problems in this country, in the Western world, is diabetes.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who have been just recently diagnosed with diabetes, they'll be looking at that and saying, wow, yes, there's a cure. Yes. And it's terrible to say cure. Yeah. But it might lead people down the airy-fairy path to thinking they're okay.
I think having a naturopath in your back pocket as another way of looking at things is just sensible, because... yes, you might be doing well on the medications and everything on the page, because don't forget, doctors just want everything to be black on that blood test. They don't want anything red and, afterwards, because then they have to do something. Like if your cholesterol isn't coming back into normal levels or your blood sugars. Exactly. So for example, there are drugs that people often take for diabetes before they need insulin injections, so type 2 diabetes. And one of the things that the drug does, so insulin is supposed to be excess insulin. So when we have a too high carb, sugar, grain diet, we can make too much, we have too much blood sugar.
Yep.
So our pancreas has to release more insulin.
To burn that up.
By the time we got diabetes, our pancreas is exhausted. It can't make enough insulin to control the amount of blood sugar in our blood. So therefore, by taking a drug, and this is what people do, they take drugs to sop up the excess sugar in the bloodstream, because the fat cells that we already have are already chock-a-block of insulin, or the pancreas isn't making enough insulin. So therefore, would make
the pancreas lazy.
It does.
There's a drug in there to do its job.
Because there's different types of cells in the pancreas. Some make glucagon, which helps to deal with fat and protein. Some make insulin, which helps to deal with sugars. Guess which ones get exhausted? It's never the glucagon-producing cells. It just isn't.
It's the one that should be active and working.
It really is. Yeah. So one of the things that some of these drugs do is basically change the cells from so they change the DNA of our cells so that other cells like fat cells and muscle cells and bone cells can sop up excess sugars and insulin.
And then you can go into another problem.
And then that links into things like osteoporosis and fibromyalgia and exhaustion and things like that.
We could talk about this for days on end.
There will always be a side effect, but I think at least if you have tests, like even once a year or something, and then can compare and go, okay, well, you're doing really well on that drug from the doctor because I'm not seeing any deterioration in your muscles or your bone mass, or, I can sort of see that's improving. But sometimes you just see that's not the case.
Sad. Look, there's always an alternative. Don't just listen to the first words uttered about a remedy. Do your research, it's not hard. Or take the simple solution if you want a second opinion, a different way of going about feeling better. New Leaf Natural Therapies, they're at 94 Edith Street, Wynnum. They're more than happy to see you. They've got an acupuncturist there and a team of ladies and gents that are only too willing to try and help you find an alternative, safe, healthy way to fix your ills. And the telephone number, Madonna, is
3348 6098.
Rolls off your tongue. Now, I didn't see you drive in today in your You come in so fast.
I'm parked on that side today.
You keep away.
Everyone was under the trees.
Except me, I'm not. Hey, we'll have you back next Friday, won't we? I
Excellent.
hope we do. Next Friday, of course, 12:15, right here at Bay FM. New Leaf Natural Therapies. They're a great team of workers down there, all for your benefit. 94 Eda Street, Wynnum.